We're now going to look at risk, infrastructure, and then risk again. Today's very much risk-focused. I'm slightly concerned at the number of operators who've realized that having someone on board their business jet for 6 hours and the ability to turn off connectivity means that virtual kidnapping could be their new business source. Okay, we're delighted to have Ed Underwood from Avsurance. Ed's a veteran of the insurance industry, which is I won't say how many years. And Ed's going to take us through this panel with Nick Bridges from Amlin and David Hernandez from Vedder.
This is on. Great. That's a good start. So we have a mixed panel here. I myself am a broker, but I'm not going to be doing much talking. Nick is an underwriter, and David is an attorney. So I think we'll start the issue with talking to the underwriter, because those are the guys that actually determine what's going on with the rates. So Nick, what's going on with the rates?
I mean, the simple answer is they're going up a bit. I sat here 12 months ago and said that the situation was unsustainable from an insurance perspective, and it's not just in our interest as insurers that the premiums go up, but also for the benefit of the whole industry. So I'm pleased to say that the rating environment has improved slightly, but we still have some way to go.
Can you still get the coverage you need if you're an operator? Is there any problem with that?
I mean, that's possibly a question more for the operators themselves, but from my perspective, we haven't received any negative feedback in terms of the coverage that we're providing from the brokers or elsewhere. I think there's probably more of a focus on the rating itself than the coverage at the moment, just to get the rating back up to where it needs to be. But from a coverage perspective, there's a lot of scrutiny on us providing the right products for our clients, and that certainly hasn't changed.
And how many underwriters are there that would write a Global Express, for example?
Plenty. There's still
10, 6, 15?
Probably, well, 100% of a risk, probably
or even
only a couple.
Vertical.
But there's still hundreds of percent of capacity out there. Some of the larger players are still writing 100% of a business jet and not co-insuring with anyone else. But even if co-insurance is required, there's still plenty of capacity out there.
Okay, so basically for the uninitiated, co-insurance is sharing the risk with another underwriter.
Exactly, yes.
But there's plenty of that available.
I wouldn't worry about that just yet.
Okay, that's good to know. This is kind of not really great for this topic, but I know we were talking, one of the other panels was talking about the aircraft business is a detailed business, transactional related. One of the things I think we should just bring up as a public service statement is that you should also be sure that your aircraft is properly insured, and many of the bigger management firms use consultants, risk management firms, but the most important thing is, of course, certificates of insurance for really accessing countries rather than just to the lender, but they're all important, and we just always emphasize at our firm that you should be sure those are issued by the underwriter, because they really don't confer any rights on you, so you want to have detailed information. So, you know, insurance is a very exciting business. It's a real page turner. So one of the things I think that's really helpful is to talk about case examples of insurance claims. And I don't know about you, David, but I've had these where we've talked about them and people say, well, that's insurance scare tactics. That never really happened. But there's some very interesting cases which I think I'm going to let David expand on.
There we go. So I'll actually go back to the previous slide, if you just allow me here. So certificate of insurance. So as an attorney, my job primarily is to mitigate risk. And in order to understand what the risks are, you have to understand what the basic underlying transactions are, or what framework you're dealing with. And so 3 words that I always tell clients that typically blow it off anyway: read the policy. In insurance terms, in insurance issues, read the policy. And I'd hazard a guess, probably 75% of the people that are in this market don't actually read the policy. So how can you possibly know whether or not you're in trouble or not if you don't know the rules upon which you're operating? So you've got to understand, read the policy. Certificates of insurance, another risk mitigation. Look at the certificates. Make sure they're accurate. You want to be an additional insured? You got to be on the certificate of insurance. If you're not on the certificate of insurance, you have no coverage. So simple things like that, that's the best way to mitigate risk. And all of the prep and stuff I've done for this panel, it's easy. It's like pulling apples out of a barrel, because people screw up so many times by either not reading the policy or by simply ignoring what they're supposed to do. We're all smart here. We understand what we should and shouldn't do. But in the insurance world, there's really no excuse for violating insurance provisions, because you have the policy, you have the certificate of insurance, and most of us know what we should and shouldn't be doing. So all of the cases that I looked at for this involve people, frankly, intentionally violating their insurance policies for either expedient reasons, for monetary reasons, or other things. So insurance issues, unlike the panel yesterday where it's a scary topic, this one's just an obvious topic that if you do something wrong with insurance, there's really no excuse.
And you're not going to get paid.
And more importantly, you're not going to get paid.
Lien holder's not going to get paid, you're not going to pay.
So that's the legal value of confirming coverage. If you don't have coverage and something goes wrong, you got to find the money somewhere, because the insurance companies, they have no obligation to pay if you violate your coverages.
Correct.
And so Ed asked me to take a look at what are the primary ways in which your insurance is violated. And this is kind of an obvious one. Having someone fly a plane that's not qualified. Pilot waiver violations or pilot coverage violations. And what do I mean by that? You don't have, in the States, you don't have a medical certificate that's valid. Your pilot certificate's not valid. You're not trained for the specific aircraft. The people operating the aircraft during an accident or incident were not authorized to do so. What we see common in international deals and transaction is you tell the insurer, I'm going to base the plane in Las Vegas, when actually you're basing the plane out of Mexico and you're doing charter operations, when you told the insurer you're only doing 91 operations. All of those things will get you in trouble and void your policy in the event of an accident or an incident. And I only spent maybe a couple hours just searching insurance policy decline, and a whole string of cases come up. And it's typically the same type of things over and over again. Things that you and I would read through and say, this is obvious. What were they thinking? But at the time, maybe it was getting a charter off the ground, making a little extra money. Their pilot was sick and they had to throw somebody else in the seat. I'm not telling you stuff that you don't already know. It happens. And you might get away with it 99% of the time. But that 1% of the time that it doesn't work, you're in a case that we read about and we talk about at these conferences. And in fact, Ed and I were reading, I was reading a case that Ed was involved in. I was
the broker. I was the broker with the customer, and I had no idea that, number one, he was a convicted drug felon. We'd insured him a long time. He was operating Gulfstreams, and I had no idea he was doing gray charter or 134 and a half.
Right. Yeah. So all of those things are things that you've got to be worried about in terms of coverage, liability issues. Because it may seem like common sense, but all of us are going to deal with it one time or another. Whether it's, pick the topic. Engines, coverage on your engines. Whether it's location, whether they're doing charter flights that you don't know about as an operator. All of those things are important that we should be concerned about, but far too often we just look the other way or don't know about. So that's my 2 cents on it. Real case examples, and so near and dear to our heart, Ed and I, that one case, and so that was a case where failed to disclose the actual truth and circumstances or facts and circumstances of the coverage. They said the plane was based in Nevada, when in fact it was really based in Mexico. They were operating 91, they were actually operating 135 or charter operations, when they said they were operating 91 operations, and there were a whole host of things. If you're violating one thing, at least their perspective was, what the heck, I'll just go crazy and do whatever I want. And that's exactly what happened. And unfortunately, there was an accident with fatalities, and
No fatalities.
they got lucky.
Just to get better, the airplane disappeared in Venezuela.
Yeah.
And 2 months later, the guy called me and said, "My aircraft's gone." I said, "What?" I mean, if you lose a Gulfstream, you would call your agent, wouldn't you, and say, "Hey, and it was an old Gulfstream, so the hull value was like $1 million. But he said, "Yeah, something happened to my airplane. Somebody stole it out of Mexico."
Yeah.
Never found out what happened to it. Never found the wreckage. Even had a friend in the CIA look for it. Couldn't find it.
But since you didn't have to pay, you really didn't care.
No, the company was in good standing to say, "Look, you lied about what you were using the airplane for. You lied about where it was based." And, this is an extreme case. In my career of 38 years of doing this is only the second time I've run into somebody like this. And it's unbelievable, especially when everybody but me knew that he was doing this, apparently.
Yeah.
Including the local FSDO.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's
Yeah.
common sense. Again, we're all smart folks here, but common sense. And if you see something like this happen, it's worthwhile to just say, look, let's think about what you're doing. But, going to the questions here, do all policies have the same coverage? How much is enough? Well, it depends on what you're doing.
That's right.
What are the risk profile? Are you doing training? Are you doing flights into dangerous areas? What type of aircraft? Do you have a VIP person that you need extra coverage in the event of an accident? Is it a billionaire? Is it a millionaire? All of those things you need to be discussing with your broker and other risk mitigation folks.
So, Nick, do you ask U.S. underwriters always ask, what's the average passenger load on this global?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
We'll tell them 2 people and they don't believe us.
There's much more onus on us these days to ask the right questions right from the start, because obviously the law is all about grey areas, and we're just trying to avoid those grey areas. Clearly, if it's a covered risk, where the loss happens, we're always happy to pay it. But if it's explicitly not, then we're obviously not going to pay it. That situation has improved over the years. But as I say, there is more onus on us to ask the right questions in the first place, but which clearly puts the onus on the client to answer those questions.
And I think we find that with the higher end aircraft, it's not as relevant because they're professional management companies. They're concerned about how much liability coverage they should have.
Yeah, we're mostly talking about GA here.
Yeah. So do you have a guideline for a high value business jet, a 650? What would you recommend? I know you can't legally, but what would you say is a common limit of liability?
For a 650, you'd probably be looking at 500.
That's what I would say, yeah.
One thing, it's interesting from my perspective when I see these policies and they ask, well, a common thing I typically see is hull insurance being overvalued based on the market value of the aircraft and the risk associated with that. And, if it's the hull insurance, what's the fair market value of the aircraft? Because there's problems with overinsuring an aircraft, because if it's overinsured, there's less likely to find that the aircraft's been totaled. And so, again,
huge problem.
Yeah, and I don't get involved in that, but I just flag it to say, look, I know you're paying this for, but why are you insuring it for $10 million more? That doesn't make any sense. Go back and talk to the broker, come back to me and see if that makes sense. And particularly you're dealing with financiers or other folks, it's got to be accurate, because no one's going to pay out more than the actual plane's worth.
No. And they will make you fix it. So the G450 that runs off the runway that has a gear go through the wing, and it should be totaled if it was insured for $4.5 or $5 million. It's insured for 10. They're going to fix it. And we have a bunch of people who could tell us what the diminution in value is for that. The airplane's pretty much worthless. So yeah.
But we often receive inquiries where we would query the limits that are being purchased or being requested by the client. So it's up to us to recommend the right limits so that they've got the right coverage in place with the benefit of our experience. Whether it's intentional or not in the first place is not really for us to say, but we can only recommend, obviously the law comes into it as well in terms of the minimum limits that need to be purchased within certain jurisdictions, but we're just certainly on hand to help with that.
And so I always, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So when the question here, what happens when coverage is not there? So I visualize the insurers giving each other high fives and getting a couple beers afterwards, because they really have to do nothing except you're declined, right? From our perspective, I try to figure out, depending on who I represent, was it a valid declination, or was there something wrong there that you should have had coverage? Again, insurance policies are agreements. You read through them and you see you're covered. More often than not, it's black or white. If there are some gray areas, I will say this. If there's a gray area, you should resolve the gray areas before you actually enter into the policy. And ask questions. Brokers and risk mitigation folks are there to resolve the issues, because no one wants to be in a situation where you have to decline something because there was an honest mistake.
And in the world as it is now, if there's no coverage under the insurance policy, they're going to look elsewhere for it. And we had actually a very famous case in the United States, was actually in the islands. I don't know if you remember I guess she would be Rap Aaliyah, the singer. Mm-hmm. She was doing a record shoot. She'd been brought down by a commercial 135 properly certificated airplane, and they decided to leave early, so they hired a 402, jumped in, overloaded it, thing crashed on takeoff. The policy limit, instead of $500 million, was $1 million with a sublimit of $100,000 a seat. So, of course, everybody was up in arms, but they got the best lawyers, and they found out that Sony Records had what they call a non-owned aircraft policy, so they were able to get actually $500 million. But those are ugly, ugly scenarios. You don't want that to happen. So, real-life examples. Give us some more, David.
Well, so the thing about insurance, when you look at some of these cases, there are actually unintended consequences too, depending on where you enter into these agreements. So preparing for this, we read a case about, so everyone loves to sue people in the United States, right? It's like winning the lottery. Boom, you roll the dice and boom, you get big numbers. And so in the event of an accident or incident, you always try to sue in either California or Cook County, Illinois. And one of the cases that I read, the policy was written in Germany. The choice of law was London. But one of the individuals the Americans were on board. The high net worth individual's mistress was on board, and there were fatalities. The plane crashed in Germany. The mistress's family tried to sue in California. Couldn't do it because it turned on the insurance policy, because the insurance policy was written in Europe. The choice of law was Europe, but even though she was an American citizen and tried to sue in California as a resident, it didn't work. So that's unintended consequences of knowing where your policy is. By contrast, the Brazilian aircraft seizure cases, because of taxes in Brazil, one gentleman tried to get out of a case in the United States and couldn't, because the policy was written in the United States. And so all of these things have intended consequences. So you don't just ask, the coverages, but the consequences of having a policy or a document either in the United States or outside the United States when you're being sued in the event of an accident. And typically people don't think about that. Well, what happens if I crash? Where am I going to get sued? Can I sue? What rights do I have? If I have somebody on board, a high net worth individual, all of those things you have to ask questions. And, if I don't know the answer, I'll defer to one of these two guys to say, look, these are tough questions. And it may happen. And so all of those things you need to figure out. In terms of other real world examples, I've got a stack of cases here, but they all turn on people lying about, and I say lying because that's actually what they did.
Absolutely it is.
They're lying about how they're using their asset. The insurance world is there to provide coverage in the event of an accident, obviously, and you have to be truthful. But operating gray charter, operating an aircraft in a different location, overflying locations. You could look at the FAA map and see where you can't fly over certain parts of Africa, you can't fly over Libya right now, you can't fly over war zones. Sometimes you can't fly over Iran. All those things need to be taken into consideration, and you don't think about it until it's too late. And you can't play the shoulda, woulda, coulda game when your plane's on fire. It's too late for that.
So Nick, most of the policies that you write or participate in, there's the standard exclusions for war territories?
Yeah.
Or give us an example of what those are.
So, I mean, like sanctions clauses, for example, would be, the typical countries that you would expect, and then there's write-backs that are available, but they're negotiable, as a side deal, basically. So you can write back, which means essentially exclude the exclusions to add those onto your policy, but they would need to be discussed with your broker, and your broker would need to discuss them with us. So that's, it's the same for all of those standard exclusions that we don't need to go into.
Yeah, and I think that's very important. But the other thing, because most of the people in this room are operating world-class aircraft, it's important to remember that if you call your broker on a Friday night, he's probably not going to be able to get a hold of the underwriter unless he's pretty connected, which we do try to wake up as many underwriters.
Depends on the underwriter, of course.
Right. You can get them, but I've had people say, look, I've got to go to Afghanistan. Can I get that added to my policy? Yeah. But there's a lot of questions. What's the security at the airport? What's the flight plan? Why are you going? Now, if it's for a government mission, you can't tell me it's a secret. I need to know. We need to know why, and everybody's got to agree to it. So those are the kind of things that really ruin your day, and it can happen with a high-end aircraft. And of course, if you're in control of the flight department, you're not going to let it happen. But time is of the essence on getting a hold of underwriters, and always get it in writing too.
I think the beauty of this topic is it doesn't happen that often, which is a good thing, right? Accident or innocence, you really don't want them to happen. And I think in a large part because of the brokers and the insurers are pretty smart, and they get it that one of the first levels of defense is having the proper policy. And the bad actors, unfortunately, there are a lot of them out there. I know in the States we're really going after people that do illegal charter or great charter. I'm on one of the task force that are combating that right now. And we're pretty good at catching people. I mean, it's easy because people tell on each other. I don't see it as aggressive in other parts of the world, but whether it's 135 operators or others, but that's one of the biggest things that we see is people violating their policies with respect to illegal charter. And, to the extent that you face that type of things, it gives the industry a bad name. And, I'm not saying that everyone should go on telling on each other, but ultimately, identify the risk, and that's the key thing. And that's why I think, at least with respect to insurance, this is a very safe industry.
And it's very regulated, wouldn't you say, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's incredibly regulated, and that's obviously what we welcome, some standardization just to get a template for how we should all act. But within an individual policy, I was just going to say that we know that the situation can change. So you might write a 12-month policy on the 1st of January, but then if your aircraft is now based somewhere that wasn't agreed at the time, it doesn't mean you should just sort of wait until, hope for the best and just hope that something doesn't happen. Just speak to your broker, and your broker will speak on your behalf to your insurers, and we'll get it sorted.
And the biggest change we've seen in the last 4 months is that because the underwriters are looking for rate increases, they're also looking to drop some coverages. So some of the free coverages that were really good, Nick, really good stuff that they give you, they're taking away.
There will be certain things that might not be free anymore.
Yeah, they're not free. They're still available, but they're taking away some of those.
But as I mentioned earlier, the main focus at the moment is on pure rate or premium. Correct. As opposed to coverage. But it just means that if you still need that coverage, it may come at a cost or at a slightly higher cost than it was before. But that's market dynamics that we all have in our own industries.
I think we have one more slide. So I've come across many unregistered aircraft in the area here, which I think you all agree with. Who will write this type of aircraft? Pretty much everyone. I think, Nick, do you like to write them in London? You do not, correct?
Sorry?
Will you write an unregistered airplane?
Yeah, absolutely.
You will?
Yeah.
As long as it's based in a
When I was based in London, obviously we saw that more than I do currently based in Singapore, but we do still see some unregistered aircraft. However, I mean, we touched on settlements or these things coming to the States from a legal perspective, and I guess you're going to touch on that now.
And I think one of the complexities, and I'm sure David can address this too, is that a lot of times the underwriter will ask, why is it unregistered and why is it based in wherever? So, I mean,
I think the big reason, not the big reason, but one of the reasons is that to register an aircraft in the United States, it's $5. You know, it's not that much money.
Good deal.
You spend more money at Starbucks, right? But you do have to, if you're a non-citizen, you have to go through a non-citizen trust. And so that adds a layer of complexity. And there's a bunch of different reasons why people register aircraft in the United States, I think, or in registry. And I see that as not as, the trend, I think, is shifting away because there's other options. There's a lot of other very reputable non-U.S. registries that people can select that offer a little bit of, customer service, if you will. They're faster to respond. It's very difficult to deal with the FAA. There's a lot of reasons why, and I think everybody has different reasons why they may want to stay on the U.S. registry or not. But one of the common examples I see from a transactional perspective, it's easier because we have the biggest market. There's a lot of transactions in the United States, so switching off the N registry to another registry, you have to deal with either export C of A's, DARs, or importation issues that may not be an issue. We were looking at two Cessnas for a client that had been based in Turkey their entire life, and the first thing we said is, how are we ever going to get these things registered on the U.S. registry, get a DAR to look at them when they've been 15 years out of the U.S., never registered in the U.S., all of the things that we have to deal with, whereas on the N registry, it's just much easier to transfer if you're transferring the N registry. But I think it all depends. Like I said, there's a lot of other registries out there. Probably 25% of my transactions, maybe a little less than that, are non-N reg, and they're typically offshore registries or jurisdictions that are very favorable and are very customer service friendly. And that's one of the reasons why I see people switching off the N reg, is they say, look, I like dealing with whatever registry, pick one, because when I pick up the phone and call them, I get an answer immediately, or I get somebody there that can answer my questions almost immediately. And when you need something done, whether you need a pilot change or you need some coverages change, or excuse me, when you need some changes, I think that's one of the reasons why customer service, and you see the increase of all these other non-U.S. registries becoming more and more successful because it's customer service, right? Most high net worth individuals don't care so much about the money when it comes to, they want to have to operate their plane in an efficient manner, and they want customer service that they can rely on.
Agreed. We had a question on the Slido. Who handles your aircraft insurance in your company? 50% said my CFO. 50% said the office bookkeeper does. Ooh. I am the owner, I do not, which is fine. So we do see that quite a bit, and as we all agree here on the panel, I think the complexities of it, you want the most senior person in the treasury function to look at it. And if they get a secondary advisor, that's fine. It's really not common to see the bookkeeper do it on a large fleet, but I've seen it happen.
Right. Well, again, this is kind of a double-edged sword, right? I mean, it's probably one of the most important things and questions and issues you deal with part of the acquisition, but it's one that's so underrated. And I keep going back to those three words: read the policy. Mm-hmm. And so I think the last deal we were on, we were back and forth saying, I don't know if these guys know what the hell they're doing. What about it? I mean, does this make sense? And this is just a conversation between Ed and I about making sure the guys have the right policy in place.
Also, the more you understand your policy, or if you don't, then speak to your broker so that you can discuss it, you'll get the best value insurance policy for you. The last thing that they want to do is be paying for coverages that they might not even need in the first place.
Right. I think insurance, the beautiful thing about insurance, it's common sense, right? I mean, it's just, we all have cars, we have car insurance, we have house insurance, life insurance. If you weigh 300 pounds, don't tell the insurer you're 150 and you run every day. I mean, it's got to be accurate. And so those are the things we have to think about. Yeah.
So we've got some Slido questions. Does Alistair make those bigger, or do we just read that? Thank you. Some single pilot clients of ours are having a hard time getting insured. Is this a new trend? It's a returning trend. At one time, it was very difficult to insure single pilot operations. for non-pros. We've had several very serious accidents in the U.S. with single pilot operations, and the underwriters are backing off. So it's not that you can't get it insured, it's that some of the people don't like the conditions where they have to fly with a pro, lower limits.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the aircraft sometimes as well from a legal perspective, if nothing else. But, it'd be unreasonable for like a Cessna 152 to impose a two-pilot warranty, for example. I don't think anyone's doing that in the industry, but these sort of, the mid-sized or the smaller jets, for example, then, a dual pilot warranty would obviously be preferable, but it just comes down to a pricing issue. There's probably a price for a single pilot operation, but it's probably going to be a little bit less for a two pilot.
And the single pilot thing does raise some coverage issues too, because there's a lot of underwriters will not approve it. So just because the aircraft's rated to be single pilot, like I know King Airs in the US are very commonly flown single pilot, but for charter, the underwriters want another body in the SIC seat.
Correct, and with the benefit of more experience, the underwriters might have had a particular case in their own minds where that's made the difference in terms of whether there was a claim or not.
And so this is actually a good one that we see occasionally. How can we speed up claims? Again, it goes back to those three golden worlds. Read the policy. What does the policy provide in terms of timing? If it doesn't provide anything, try to talk to the broker and see what the timing is before you have the accident or incident. And then after the fact, in the event of an accident or incident, you typically, if you want to get serious, have your attorney pester them constantly.
That works.
Yeah, right? I mean, that
works every time.
Yeah, just call and say, what's going on?
Yeah.
Give me an update. And it's not being antagonistic, but worst case scenario, in the event of an accident or incident, we may be friends and hang out and stuff like that, but if things go badly, we've got to change our hats to being an adversarial relationship, and my primary obligation is to my client. And so that's the thing. You always want to maintain a friendly and professional relationship. But calling and saying, look, what is going on? This is taking months or weeks. There's nothing wrong with that because it's an agreement.
How important is it to have the actual operator as a named insured?
Very.
The most important thing, probably.
And that's
a good question, though.
It is a good one, because if it's a question, that means that somebody doesn't know the answer.
Yeah.
That's another one. Read the policy, folks. If someone who's operating the aircraft isn't anywhere named in the policy, how are you going to say that this plane crashed or had an incident and it was being operated by X? Again, there's going to be a discussion at the insurer level. Do we pay out in this event? I mean, it's an obvious one that, again, that's why insurance is so easy when it comes to issues, because it's more often than not black or white. If you don't have the operator as a named insured or an additional insured, depending on the facts and circumstances, that's a big issue. That's problematic.
It's always best to think about the worst case scenario, basically, at the time, just to make sure that if something does happen, then you've got the insurance there to pay for it.
David Hernandez has a fan in the audience.
It's not Paul Jebeli.
Yes.
Right. All right.
We can do one more, probably. What is the most important criteria in choosing your underwriter? Price, experience, size, or other? Mr. Nick?
Is that a question for me? I mean, I don't choose an underwriter.
Well, actually, you would choose yourself, obviously.
Of course I would. I'm on stage.
I would think that, you want somebody who's been writing aircraft insurance a long time. You want experienced claim staff that's related to the slow claim payment. And yes, you do want someone who's not going to go out of business because they're in the Nigerian underwriting pool and have a net worth of like 100,000.
Yeah, I think within size, there's security rating as well, and there's financial backing. I mean, what we've seen, I kind of touched upon at the start about some consolidation within the market. I mean, the biggest ones are tending to survive better than the smaller ones at the moment, which is probably not a bad thing overall for the clients, because they're more likely to have the financial backing to pay for the claims that could happen.
Yeah, we don't get involved in that. I mean, really don't. I just ask. You know, I ask Ed or somebody else, have you heard of them?
Yeah. And you can look it up. There's a book called The Best Review that'll rate them. But I'd rather you call me and charge your client.
Right. I don't get involved in that
for you.
process other than if it seems suspicious, if it's like Bucky's Insurance, I go, who is Bucky? So you ask the question. Yes, that's an easy one.
And if you don't understand it, speak to your broker.
Right.
Yes, you should read the policy at all times.
Right. Just show of hands. I'm just curious. How many people actually read an insurance policy?
Are we telling the truth here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's good bedtime reading. Highly recommend it.
They're thick. They're really thick.
They're thick.
And the words are small.
And sometimes they're double-sided, which is even worse.
Right. And they're heavy.
Thanks, guys. I think that's pretty much it.
That's it, yeah.
And here comes Alistair.
I
Thanks
think
for
we
the help
stop
with
there.
the clicker.
Read the policy. Thank you very much.